Hey there, welcome to episode 5 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo, as always, recording this on the evening of December 27, 2023. The year is nearly up, so is time. Today we're going to talk about our mobile devices. We all have them, most of us anyway. The vast majority, I think, at this point. They're all pretty much the same. Maybe you have a mobile phone. Is it even a phone anymore? Do we all have a tablet here or there somewhere? We might have a laptop, 2, 3, maybe a small one to carry around, maybe an office-owned desktop replacement sometimes. I've been in those shoes. Evolutionary changes are becoming more specific. With each iteration of our mobile devices extra safe. Your iPhone 15 or whatever they're on is very similar to the 14. At this point, you really just list the new thing, the new camera sensor, the new maybe AI part. I know Google is big on the tensor parts to accelerate machine learning algorithms on their mobile devices. How cool. But in general, we are carrying around a glass rectangle in our pocket. And that has been true for way too long, in my opinion. Maybe yours too. There's an infinitely prolific designer. His name was Raymond Loewy. I have a link in the show notes, which I'll get to in a moment. He had an approach which was called minimally advanced yet acceptable. It means that instead of unloading a brand new concept on someone that's out of left field and too foreign and too weird. And I'll give an example of that in the humane AI pin, I'm sure. But rather than unleashing a bizarre, radical change, you introduce changes slowly, the familiar surprise. Start with something familiar and make a surprise, add a surprise. I think we need more surprise. In the show notes, wherever you're finding this audio program, there are some links. The first two are, as is going to be true in general, my very, very casual attempt at not only monetizing a little bit my media production efforts with a buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo link and a ko-fi.com coffee, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Monies are applied to coffee. It's true. True story. I use the Buy Me a Coffee site so far, not as much with the Ko-fi site at this moment. Mostly as a out-of-band profile page of sorts. I have all my shows and projects, hopefully more coming for 2024, listed on my buymeacoffee.com profile. My most recent supporter, there aren't too many. You can still have a chance to get in on the elite first 100. My most recent supporter supported my purchase of a 2.2 kilogram bag of Lavazza Grand Espresso, I think it is. Bean. I have two different types of Lavazza beans in the 2.2 kilogram. Sorry, 2.2 pound, 1 kilogram. Ugh, so American. 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds of fine Lavazza coffee beans. Thanks in one case to support through buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. So there, enough of that. A couple of the other links you can check out if you find the description of this episode. A link to the Raymond Loewy website, the late Raymond Loewy, wherein he describes, or one of his agents describes why some brands have a disruptive success record and some do not. And it goes into detail about Maya, the minimally advanced yet acceptable notion. There have been a few cool. There's an author from I believe it's The Atlantic. I've mentioned this in one of my other shows, talking about Maya and the familiar surprise concept, and the stickiness of products, and why, something that seems cool, you add a little something new to it and becomes very appealing. If you start out with only the new thing and you make it completely weird, people are a little put off by the unfamiliar. So, something to think about. Framework laptops. This is an example of a company that said, you know what, we're going to make laptops more open. the Apple II of laptops. If you are not an Apple fan person, you know that Steve Wozniak really wanted the Apple products to be open and modifiable and hackable. Play with your computer, it's yours, and make it yours, and so on. And that's his whole life, even today. He loves that. I think he actually likes Android better than iPhone, in fact. But the framework people have decided to make laptops upgradable and modifiable, and some really interesting thinking. In this case, if you check out their website, frame.work, you can see that they're sticking with the clamshell style design, but they made some engineering accommodations so that you could actually modify it, upgrade it, and so on. The laptop as is got its wrist rest keyboard layout. That is the keyboard towards the back of the bottom of a clamshell with a display that flips up with a sort of interference fit hinge that's been around since the 90s, the early 90s. There was a time when laptops had trackballs, or if you're a ThinkPad or now Lenovo fan, you know of the, what is it called? The stick? The Think Stick? I don't know what it's called. The red stick on there. The control input device for the mouse, the cursor, has varied a little bit, but the touchpad is king for the moment. The touchpad and then the touch screen. Some laptops have a second screen, but they're all pretty much the clamshell design at this point. And maybe there's time for a change there too, but it is a remarkably functional design in some cases. However, it is not always the best. And I will give you an example right now. I'm not going to talk about this too much in general in this episode, but if you've ever sat in or been seated in the normal economy class on an airplane, and you are maybe flying long enough, or you're going for a meeting of some sort and you want to work on a presentation, and the person in front of you decides to lean back, you are done. The tray table, which was barely holding your clamshell laptop anyway, is now tilted such that you can't see your screen anymore. Well, it would be cool if the screen was more like a tablet. You could take the screen off and put it so you could see it. And now that there are tablets with keyboards, they've kind of realized that design. So there's been a lot of interesting work in the laptop space, not only framework, but also, like I said, the tablet with the keyboard and so on. Some interesting things to look at when we consider mobile phones, which is really the crux of today's episode. We need to start thinking about our mobile devices as something other than a glass rectangle, and that's what we'll get to. There was a lot of creativity back in the early days of mobile devices. There were, especially Nokia was kind of known for their offbeat stuff. There's an article on Screen Rant about unusual phone designs, the weirdest mobile phones ever. And so you can check that out. Some of them I had in my hand to use or try. They were cool back then. The OS was nowhere near as complicated, the operating system on the devices, but they were interesting. I think the split keyboard one is kind of interesting today, although I'm also a BlackBerry fan, which we'll get to. There was a Phone Blocks project with a no C, Phone Block KS, Phone Blocks. I have a Wikipedia link and a link to a website called One Army about the Phone Blocks project. That was a cool idea. If you think framework, but applied to a mobile phone, and then Google took that a step further, when they took the project and they renamed it. I think they acquired the Phone Blocks team tech, and they turned it into the Google ARA, ARA. So there's a Wikipedia page about that. I knew someone who worked on the ARA project. It was very, very novel, but it did still stick with the rectangle. So it was not completely outlandish. It was a rectangle that you could attach with magnets and some reliable of some connection technology of some sort. So not quite pogo pins, but something like you would slide your peripherals onto the back of your mobile device. So you're basically carrying around a display with some slots on the back with magnets, or I think it was magnets, but it may have been, you can read the article. Maybe it was interference fit or a click, satisfying click when you slide in the module. Yeah, it allowed things like, or it would have allowed for things like upgrading cameras and adding memory and adding maybe a tensor processor, TPU. So adding peripherals to your phone as needed, I kind of like. And then Motorola did some of this too, for very briefly. They had a Pogo. Pogo pins are little spring-loaded pins so that when you engage the contacts, they kind of press and make contact when you assemble the peripheral and the host device together. So Motorola had some interesting ideas there, but mostly sometimes there are aftermarket cases that allow you to add on a battery pack or memory or other, like maybe a flash thumb drive / micro SD card adapter of some sort. So these are out there, they're floating around, and they're usually niche products. And it's unfortunate because these creativity niches are where cool ideas could come from, but they don't really get much attention, I think. Seed Studio, Seed with 3 E's. In Shenzhen, 15 years old this year. They had a project called the Rephone. They put re in front of things for some of their novel projects and platforms. So the Rephone, I have a link on their wiki. I actually have a Rephone somewhere in a box. Interesting idea. Focus mostly on the internals. The phone industrial design was cardboard, but it was meant to be a usable hacking device, as it not a flipper, but a device on which you could experiment. So you could be you would have a hackathon around the Rephone, for example. Interesting idea, some cool novel approaches to things as always, and of course niche, and you probably have never heard of it. So that's unfortunate. I want to point out the Lego phone stuff that you can find on eBay. They're not real phones yet, but the notion is interesting. If you look at the aura and the framework and you think to yourself what Lego has been able to accomplish over the years, it's something interesting to think about, that direction, and something I'll touch on again later in this episode. Google Fuchsia is a new operating system that I happen to know a couple of people, I think, that are still working at Google on it. The Fuchsia operating system eschews Linux for a new kernel, new internals. The people that I know working on it are very talented. It's entirely possible that this would be a game changer. But if you think back to the wise words of Raymond Loewy, minimally advanced yet acceptable, changing the OS out from under a substantial user base is something Apple could pull off with their change from, which is insane. I worked at Apple during this time when they switched from 68,000 Motorola 68,000 processors to the joint venture IBM Motorola Apple PowerPC, and almost nobody noticed, unless you were using a floating point bound software package. And then, wow, was that slow? The PowerPC 601. But it's something it's tricky to do. It takes a lot of effort to get it right, and even then, it probably won't be completely right. And then to do it again and switching from PowerPC to Intel processors, and then to do it yet again, and we're talking desktop and laptop machines here, to do it yet again and switch to custom ARM parts is outlandish. And so Apple, kudos to you for accomplishing that. And again, like I worked at Apple during that first one, and technically they did switch from the 6502 from MOS, I think it was, and then on to the 65816 from Western Design Center, and then on to 68K. So they've been doing this for quite a while. The early 6502 stuff was not compatible, although it could be emulated, but it is not trivial to switch out your fundamental hardware, and which is why virtual machines have become commonplace. The Kotlin stuff on Android, for example, allows you to run your virtual machine apps, your byte-coded apps on maybe an Android platform, maybe something else, maybe running on an ARM part, maybe something else. So interesting times. I've actually run Android x86 in a virtual machine on my computer. It's functional. I don't know about usable. So yeah, Google Fuchsia, an interesting novel approach to the software on your phone, which is going to be an important thing we talk about during this episode. And then making a lot of news lately, the humane OpenAI powered Star Trek AI pin. If you've ever watched Star Trek The Next Generation, you know their communicators, their little Starfleet badge, and they would tap it and it would make a little beep beep, and then they could communicate. So if you are a Star Trek fan, you should already have made that connection. If not, it's intended to be like a brooch style device, which those are always popular, always. Universally, I don't know anyone who's not wearing a brooch of some sort, whether it's technologically enabled or otherwise. So a brooch style device, I'm sure everyone will be wearing them, just like the Google Glass. Step one, make your device look out of place on the user. So we'll see what happens there. Anyway, so old phones through history. As I mentioned, I have that link for the unusual, weirdest phones on Screen Rant there. When I was in high school, I think it was, my mom had a business such that she had to be in touch with her clients and customers and contractors and suppliers and so on. So she had a phone bolted into her car and the little piglet antenna on the back window. If nobody knows what that is, you missed out. Later, she had one of those Motorola bone phones. It just looks like a big dog bone with the keyboard on the. It's very thin for the size of it. It looks weird. It looks like a weird handset, and with the little black antenna sticking out, you could forego the piglet antenna. The evolution continued. Eventually, she had pretty much every phone known to man, and she was racking up like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 minutes a month, so she was a power user to be sure. No other person need demonstrate the importance of mobile connectivity. She has the same phone number throughout, so that was a cultural revolution even. In our own home, I could watch from early on, and so some of my phone views are certainly informed. I don't know about inspired because I've had a lot of hands-on time myself, but certainly watching early adoption of mobile technology like this was informative, to be sure. There was a time when device makers like Nokia, and I owned a lot of Nokia devices, were prone to experiment. They were making weird devices. The gamer phone. There's a phone that's shaped like a rhombus, which I think is pictured in that article. With the buttons around the outside edge. There were phones that were like lipsticks or pens, or the gaming phones that were designed specifically for gaming. There was the infamous Matrix flip phone, not flip phone. I don't even know. It's not a flip, where the bottom part of the phone would snap out, like you push a button and it would. And kind of a switchblade effect. And so that got to be very popular, although very fragile. There were phones with round number pads, keypads. There were, I think one of the coolest ones was the phone with the split keyboard and the screen in the middle. Great for texting. There was a phone where the front keypad would flip over and create a split keyboard. So on the back, so you'd flip up the top of the kind of the cover of the phone. It would flip around the screen. There may be a picture in that article. I didn't notice. But so you'd have access to a split keyboard if you wanted. So this was real experimentation time. It was a great time to be in the phone arena. I myself owned a Nokia 2160, 6190. I had another phone, which I think was the 8190, the 90. The 60 was I had it on Singular in California, in the Bay Area. So it was, I want to say TDMA. It might have been CDMA. I don't remember. The 6190 and any 90 series at the end there was GSM 900. This was in the early days when, I'm sorry, not GSM 1900. 900 was in Europe. So GSM 1900 in America, then they added 1800 and the 1850 and some other, now the Gen 5 bands are all over the place. But back in the day, you'd get the GSM phone with the SIM and, oh, wow, I can have multiple phones. I don't have to go deal with customer support to change which phone I'm using for my Verizon or Sprint or other carriers like that. Very convenient. This led eventually to my because I was using T-Mobile, which at the time was called VoiceStream, VoiceStream with Ping Pong, which was texting. It's good old days. T-Mobile being a Deutsche Telekom company with their subsidiary in America. They were an early adopting, which I think T-Mobile actually generally is. T-Mobile's a little weird, but an interesting company in general. So we have the T-Mobile Arena here in Vegas, unaffiliated with me. I eventually got the Android G1, the first Android device, with my mobile account that I had my SIM. I could stick the SIM in the Android device. But I also had I had a BlackBerry Curve, which was stable. And when I began working at Palm on their new phone, the Pre, which you probably don't remember, that's okay. When I began working on the Palm Pre, it was in the sort of the secret building, a nondescript, no company logo on the outside. I interviewed with a couple of people, at least one of whom is working on Fuchsia. And for the interview, I placed my Android G1. I think it was the T-Mobile G1 actually, but it was Android powered. I placed it on the table right in front of me on my side of the table. So when I would speak to someone, the phone was there. And that drew the conversation to that device. And we talked about what I liked about it, what I didn't like, what I would change, and so on. So it was a nice physical and technique device to take control of the interview. So that was useful. But day to day, walking around Palm, I had my BlackBerry Curve. My favorite phone to this day, it had the trackball. It was before they switched over to the little teeny tiny square touchpad. So I had a real trackball, which eventually failed and became unusable. But I used the BlackBerry Curve, and I was asked on multiple occasions, why don't you walk around with your Palm Pre? Why don't you live on the Palm Pre? Why don't you use the Palm Pre? And I would always say this, but I was serious. I wasn't intending to be mean. I would say, I want a phone that works. I need a phone that works. I cannot use a phone that will burn up in my pocket thanks to power management bugs. It was a phone in development. It's really hard to commit 100% to a phone that could break on the next software update. We still have that today, but you pay more for them. So I had my BlackBerry Curve. I eventually got a BlackBerry Bold when that trackball quit. I had my Palm Pre, which I never actually used as a real device, and I don't even have one. I gave it to somebody at some point. The mechanical design of the Palm Pre was really interesting. It was a little bit of a throwback, some novel ideas. I would very much like to see that come back. The material design stuff and the card interface, Matias Duarte, I think he's gone a little nuts. That's a different discussion. But he took the ideas that didn't really make it into the marketplace from the Palm Pre and Palm Pixie, the Palm OS. LG bought the company, and they were applying the Web OS to their televisions, their embedded software on their smart TVs. But a lot of those ideas have made it into Android and to iPhone. And while there is bickering over whether iPhone is copying Android and so on, essentially Matias Duarte, for better or worse, has unleashed a lot of ideas into the Android marketplace of user experience, and we have what we have. I had a Samsung Galaxy device or two back when they were for like the Galaxy 2 or something like that. It was a long time ago. Great phone, great camera, great phone in general. Very, very happy with it. I owned a couple of Nexus phones, including one that went into boot loops. So I think I had 4 of the Nexus 4 phones, thanks to failures and total chaos and absolute disappointment. But for some reason, I stuck with Google, and I've had several Pixels over the years. I have a Pixel 6a. Because you know what? I don't have any desire to spend money on phones like the cutting edge device anymore. They're all the same iterations of reinstalling, updating, making sure that the data that you had on the old phone is moved over, being disappointed when it isn't, when it gets messed up some way. So the Pixel phones at the very least get the security updates from Google, which to me was somewhat worthwhile, but thanks to my being a Google Fi customer, not endorsing that either, but I get the upgrade deal and free phone that you just have to you can pay for it monthly, but then they'll give you a credit for the cost of the phone. So you're just using the Google Fi service on a free phone. That is fine. I hate Android. The only thing I hate more than Android is iOS. So modern phone hardware, as I was intimating, is basically a rectangle. It's a glass rectangle. They've trimmed off all the buttons. If you had the Android T-Mobile G1, it had 4 buttons on the front, plus a trackball, plus volume buttons on the side. It was basically like a sidekick. You could flip the screen up, and there was a full keyboard under there. The phone was a small tank. It was a small troop carrier. It probably would not survive what a tank might. User serviceable battery. All of these things are gone. The notion of having a trackball on a mobile phone would get you laughed out of a room. Having a full keyboard is something that still lingers on the hacker front. There have been attempts. I think the Titan phone from Unihertz is floating around there. There have been some companies that have tried to bring back the BlackBerry. You can purchase a BlackBerry keyboard attached to a little some ESP part, I think, and you could have a little Bluetooth BlackBerry keyboard that you can interface with your various projects. Definitely not mainstream consumer. So the notion of a keyboard, like a full keyboard phone, full keyboard being the number of keys, but certainly not the size, is very tricky to fit all that into the teeny tiny microelectronics that make up the phone now, to try to even squeeze in a battery that cannot be serviced by the user. The display and the camera and the battery, the processor. Some phones are having a gigabyte of RAM at this point, all with one little tiny connector, now mandated by most places to be a USB Type-C. Maybe you have near field communications, NFC radio coil in the back, and so you can do wireless transfers. Maybe in your charging station, you have a little spot on your desk or on an adapter. You can rest your phone on a cradle or a pad of some sort, and you can charge your phone, and maybe you can sync your phone at that time. You can connect devices to each other. You can scan RFID and NFC devices like smart cards that have a coil in them, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all little tiny minor things. But for the most part, the casual user has a glass rectangle in their pocket, and it's probably running one of two choices, because that's the number that we can deal with, is iOS on your iPhone or Android on your some sort of device that runs Android. And that's the interesting part, is that Android has enabled the market to at least stay a little bit crazy. It makes life a little bit more difficult for developers. The job of Google is to abstract that away. It has taken a decade or more. They're kind of getting it. They've made a hardware abstraction layer that sort of works, maybe. You should not have to wait a year or two to get the latest version of an OS on your LG, which doesn't make phones anymore, but they were making some interesting phones also. Your LG or your Samsung or your Asus or your Huawei or whatever it is, whatever's running Android, you should be able to update the OS and not have to contend with the various hardware tricks that each manufacturer has unfurled to make their device unique. Because at the end of the day, they're all just unique enough to be a pain. I had an LG phone that had a camera gesture recognition. You could do something like adjust the volume with a finger gesture. Never used it, not once. But I'm sure that the support for that required an extra 6 months to a year to get any software updates. It was very late and didn't really work. I mean, the phone getting software updates. So what you end up with is trying to be unique becomes an integration nightmare, becomes a very poor user experience. You don't get the latest software that your friend has. You all look with envy at the one device that the iOS people have to develop and roll out for this year, and then the various issues they have backporting the latest OS as needed. But they at least control the environment, and that was always Apple's thing, was to control every aspect. So you have basically two choices. You have the draconian vertical of Apple, and you have the wild, wild west horizontal of Android, which is becoming a little bit more vertical. Unfortunately, like I said, though, the unusual devices are becoming less frequently available. They get a little bit of attention with CES coming up January 9th, 2024. I'm sure there will be a selection of phones that might raise some eyebrows. But for the most part, we are dealing with glass rectangles every year. The latest glass rectangle, whether it will have 3, 4, 5, 2, 1 camera lenses on the back, whether it will have a wide angle and a telephoto, whether it's doing computed imagery, which I think both Google and Apple have been focusing on a lot, because where can you differentiate your device? On the pictures it takes. Do you have an AMOLED screen? Do you have a camera behind the screen? So they're getting really tricky with accommodating the rectangle. The camera is the thing that most people use. The selfie cam, especially. The selfie cam was traditionally the weakest camera on the phone, but now it has to compete directly. Use the back, higher resolution, higher quality, full range, wide angle, telephoto, portrait lenses on the back of the phone, but have a display on the back so you can do the selfies as well. Or, as some would try, just put a mirror on the back so you can see your face. There's filters now, so I got to be able to see the filter so I can tell if the dog snout on my face is lined up. Yeah, so all these things about camera have really been driving quite a bit of the technology. That will probably not go away, but I am still concerned that we are all still using glass rectangles. I used to work in the Newton group at Apple. The Newton, for those who don't remember the good old days, was a very strange personal digital assistant. I myself had the MessagePad 100, and then I got the job in the Newton group because I wanted to try it out. So MessagePad 100 didn't really work. It was the size of let me think. It was the size of a small tablet. It was probably like a 4-inch diagonal rectangle, vertical, portrait orientation, with a stylus, a capacitive screen. You could draw characters and it would try to recognize them. A really interesting device. It was powered by an ARM processor, which was probably that was a weather report right there. ARM is going to be doing this a lot. The MessagePad was a battery hog. It would last for hours. Then you'd have to charge it again or replace the batteries. I don't remember. I think it had rechargeables. I was working at Apple at the time with a colleague who we shared an office, and he had an HP Hewlett-Packard 100LX palm top computer. It had a full keyboard, a flip-up screen. It was like a little tiny laptop. I mean, really tiny, much smaller than the Newton. And he said, I use this Newton. I mean, I use this all the time. And said, the Newton is neat, but I use this all the time, and I have real information on here. I can type in notes and contacts and all that. It wasn't attached to a phone, nor was the MessagePad, although the MessagePad did have PCIe MCIe expansion capabilities. I think that was definitely true in the MessagePad 210, not the 100. 200, MessagePad 200, 210, whichever one it was. So you had the flip-up cover, you had the slot in the back, you could put in a modem, so you could at least do data transfer, so you could access what there was of the internet back then on your Palm device. Very interesting. So he said, I use my HP 100. Now, the interesting thing, and this is what you could read this at the time, it was common sort of debunking of this crazy, ridiculous PDA concept. An HP 100LX was built by a company. HP was big in the calculator business at the time. They still are, arguably, sort of. They're not Casio and they're not TI, but the HP calculator is still a thing. So the HP 100LX would have battery life in the weeks, months, who knows. The Newton was in hours, if you're lucky. So the comparison was the difference between a calculator company making a PDA and a computer company making a PDA is found in the battery life, which is true. If your thinking is overpowering your pocket device at the time, the battery life would be in hours. And they definitely tried to accomplish quite a bit. It was the Apple Advanced Technology Group with their handwriting recognition and some of the other concepts. The Newton script language, inspired by Self, very similar to JavaScript. And I had that conversation with Brendan when I first started working at Netscape, the similarities. And he said, yes, people don't often recognize the self history. Self is a language itself as well. So some interesting things came out of the Newton, but it was not the future. The phone blocks project, some more Lego thinking. So Lego thinking is like, let's let people build the things that they want to build. Like, here's the instructions for this kit, but you don't have to follow them. The phone blocks project was really interesting. It enabled you to construct your phone with the features that you wanted or the upgrades that you wanted later. You could probably, like an open computer system today, if you were to think into the future, you could probably see a phone that would have, or a mobile device, maybe it didn't need to have a phone modem in it. Maybe you could switch out the modem so it would be 5G compatible later. Maybe you wanted 2 different cameras, maybe stereo camera, right? Maybe you wanted more wide angle. Maybe you wanted an attachment for an extended lens, which you can find today, but maybe that would be a better sort of integratable feature for other kinds of photography. Maybe you'd want to add an IR camera, which you can as a USB peripheral today, but maybe you snap that onto the back of the phone block. Google took that over. The Project Aura was intended to be a modular phone. It sort of withered, as most Google projects do. I think that's kind of a bummer, but that would have been the Lego thinking. And I'm a big fan of Lego. I've had Lego devices. I don't use them so much today, although maybe I should. But I was in my early days of engineering, around kindergarten or so, Tinker Toys, Lincoln Logs, and Lego. Can't go wrong. So the software part, though, that's the part that's really interesting, because even if you're stuck with the glass rectangle, and Apple had the first mover advantage. So they launched the glass rectangle with the capacitive touchscreen. I think on the Newton, I said capacitive. It was a resistive touchscreen. It means you had to actually push on the screen with your plastic stylus. You could draw it on with your finger, but your finger was too big. So you really couldn't get good lines if you were drawing text, but you could draw it on with your finger. Single touch, one finger. So the stylus enforce that, you get a better rendering on your screen and so on. So Apple comes out with their multi-touch capacitive screen and very closed system. Steve Jobs was the opposite of Steve Wozniak. He did not want people to be able to mess with his creation. So they had the first mover advantage. Very closed, very single use. Tap on the button, the visual icon button, to launch an application, and then you close the application and move on. Hit that home button. So they pretty much set the tone. At the time when the Android device was coming out, it looked more like a BlackBerry, but they were like, "Oh, keyboard went away. Let's switch over to this hybrid thing, so that the keyboard is tucked under the screen instead of at the bottom of the device," and so on. Apple used their own operating system platform, which was not like the Mac OS at the time, OS 10, OS X, and other variants, whenever that came out. So that was still aimed at PowerPC, then Intel, and so on. Eventually they would move to like a BSD kernel, Mach, BSD, all kinds of stuff going on at Apple, crazy. Android was based on Linux, and it became a substantially forked version of Linux. Probably doesn't even recognize Linux as a relative at this point, sort of. They may move to Fuchsia, maybe. That would be a super high risk. Apple can pull that off. Google, I doubt it. Maybe, we'll see. The fact that the software runs on a virtual machine, though, sitting on top of the operating system, makes it a little bit more viable. This was not true back in the Apple days. People were writing C code, or probably Mac app, and not quite to the point of running Objective-C at the time, but people were running machine compiled code. So emulating that in software to make the transition better was a no small undertaking. Mobile devices running apps as bytecode compiled virtual machine style executables makes it a little bit more plausible. So it'll be interesting to see. But But the bottom line is, oh, and by the way, Amazon is switching away from from Android. So your Fire tablets, your Fire TV will, in the near term, years, not months, but in the near term, will not be running Android. They're cooking up their own version of a Linux-based operating system. So we'll see how people feel about that when they are no longer able to possibly as easily sideload Android apps or put the Google Play Store app on their Fire device and so on. BlackBerry OS had a lot of ground established. Their hardware and software were kind of famous for being pretty secure. They had spent Research in Motion in Canada had spent a lot of time on building a secure platform used by various government types and celebrities until they got hacked eventually. The celebrities anyway. So BBM, the BlackBerry Messenger, was sort of infamous. So they had a lot of innovation, but the BlackBerry OS had gone its way. Eventually, BlackBerry tried running Android on its devices, and it was fine. Android on a BlackBerry is pretty cool. Just didn't catch on. I wish it would have, and who knows, maybe it will someday in another form. And then, of course, Windows Mobile tried to make a Windows experience, starting with Windows CE, tried to make a Windows-like, desktop-like experience on your mobile device. Windows CE went on to Windows Mobile with the Windows 7, whatever it was, style, square, grid interface, not so much the icons made famous on the iPhone, but these grid buttons that were not as appealing, I guess. So the software terrain, based on where we have come from, hasn't really changed a lot. We've come down to the two that everybody knows. There are some offshoots. There's Graphene, which tries to get rid of the Google parts of Android. There's probably nothing that runs easily on the iPhone hardware, but the Android hardware, because it is intended to be slightly more open, you're able to run variants. There's the legacy, what is it called? There's a legacy OS or something to try to make older hardware stay current. So there's more active, independent software development going on the Android platform itself or the hardware. But in general, what we have discovered, all of us during the years, is that mobile devices require an ecosystem and a community of people to use that ecosystem, because it doesn't make sense to keep building phones if nobody's running software on them. That's where Nokia and BlackBerry ended up. Fine hardware, cool stuff, but people are not continuing to buy and demand, so there's no innovation potential in their business plans, so they fold up. So Google and Apple have managed to make themselves essential, and with only two main innovators, I'm not conscientiously leaving out other innovators. Like I mentioned, Unihertz does some interesting stuff. They run Android. There are devices that are basically built to run Android. That's a market enabler. There was the Scion style device, which I think it was the Neptune communicator. I can't remember. I saw them at CES a couple years ago. Also cool, the full size keyboard, the keyboard sideways on the device, so the screen would flip up, similar to a Scion, which was another Palm Top way back when. So there are people that are doing interesting things. There are companies doing interesting things. There are people trying to maintain open source style variants of the Android platform. I've run the Android x86 port. It's an open source port. I think it actually had the Play Store in it though. Running it on VirtualBox on my Linux machine, so I could run an Android app on my desktop. There are other ways to do it. There are containers now. There are virtual machine, simplified virtual machines, more of a container style, to allow you to run the Kotlin stuff on your platform of choice. So there are some interesting options becoming available, but the ecosystem is still really oriented towards powering future innovation on these two core platforms. If you are able to run Android on your variant, if you're a Samsung or Huawei, or ZTE? Any number of companies around the world who have an Android variant, an Android compatible hardware platform that they can run just enough Android on to get by as a cost reduced platform or so on. But all of these depend on people like you and me running apps, maybe even buying them. The App Store lawsuit between Epic and Google will be interesting to see how the Play Store in that case shakes out as far as charging fees and so on. Apple probably in the crosshairs of somebody at this point with their iTunes Store fees. So you have to, though, participate in this ecosystem to make the hardware viable. Otherwise, there's no real reason to keep selling hardware. The hardware I mentioned earlier, I get a Pixel 6a almost a year ago now. Yeah, it's a little over a year actually. Get a Pixel 6a for free. Google Fi, the wireless service, refunds the monthly. You pay for it over 2 years, but they just send you a credit. They add it to your bill, so you're really only paying for the mobile service. So if I purchase any apps in the App Store, the Play Store, or if I make use of any services that, the Play Store books and movies or all the other stuff they're canceling, they use the hardware to make the money on the software. So that's pretty common. That's the razor blade model, right? You make money on the blades, you sell the handle for free. So in order to innovate in the hardware, the software has to be more tightly bound to the companies driving it. This makes it difficult to innovate beyond this vertical approach, because now if I want to build a new mobile device, and trust me, I've done it, I worked at Palm, hands-on hardware development. It is not trivial. Power management is no fun, because every time somebody comes out with a new phone, you don't see this, but the effort that goes into just making sure the battery life is reasonable, that the Wi-Fi radios come on at the right time, that the range is expected, that it meets the specs, that it passes FCC and other certifications in different markets. It is a tremendous undertaking to make these things work. So that's where a lot of your development time goes in, because Apple and Google and Samsung and Motorola and HTC, if they're still around, Huawei, the One Phone, all these phone companies that make devices, they all have to do the same things over and over because they're coming up with these unusual designs. This is not going to go away, but I do have to wonder if the hardware side could benefit from K-Pro thinking. And if you are a classic IBM PC fan, you remember how that all started, where suddenly now the designs can open up. You can get pre-certified modules. You don't have to actually design everything from the ground up. If you think like the Phone Blocks and Aura project, you might say, well, I can certify one add-on module that will work across all these different devices, because there's some sort of a standard, an interoperability standard that would enable the hardware to move faster without having to literally reinvent the wheel every single time and get it certified by different markets and different carriers. By the way, if you want to use your phone with T-Mobile or AT&T or Sprint or whoever's still in business nowadays, you got to make sure you get certified on those. They have to be approved on your network. And there's all sorts of radio numbers and so on, your IMEIs and your other digits that you'll find on your on the phone itself inside, or in the About This Phone tool if you have one on your device. So all this infrastructure required to make these devices work is probably a reasonable chunk of the development cost and effort and time that goes into these. So the platform itself is very tricky, and so they must lock them down to try to recover some of those costs. And that impacts the ecosystem, because you are now beholden to the platform and what you are, quote unquote, allowed to run, unless you want to sideload or jailbreak or all these other hacks that are not comfortable or friendly to the casual user. So they all look similar. Now you have to differentiate on computer photography, so the camera application that only runs on the Pixel, doesn't run on lesser devices, etc. Which phone has which AI hardware, which one has the FaceTime compatible this and the fingerprint reader under the screen for that, and so on and so on and so on. So they at once are a glass rectangle that must compete on the smallest of features that can fit into those boundaries. I don't know if I pointed this out. I don't like cell phones anymore. I used to be a big fan. Used to revel in getting the latest whatever. Like, oh, new phone came out. Got the whatever discount or whatever upgrade, however that went. I had my Android G1 when the G2 came out, which was a much more sleek, foldable. The screen would fold out for a keyboard, but much more space age looking. Got the G2 almost immediately. Like, oh, awesome. It was not a great phone, but it looked cool and it had a great user experience on the outside. Industrial design was great. And then the next phone after that, and so on. So I was always getting a new phone and making sure I would upgrade the OS and upgrading the apps all the time, copying my stuff over, reloading all the apps that were on there. I've never been through an iPhone update experience, but I have to assume it's sort of similar, like the world with and without cloud backups, right? There's no reason to ever lose someone's contact information. Who dis? New phone, who dis? There's no reason for that. So I think people still use it, but the age of always present data is at hand. So here's the question. So now we're on to the what's next. So I have a couple of ideas. So I've already described what we have. What works is that mobile devices do kind of work. What does not work is lock-in, excessive limitations and privacy violations. So you're not allowed to do certain things, and you give up your location constantly and other personal information. Your phone is hackable. The latest, which app store apps are stealing your credentials and so on. So these systems are, because they're closed, left to the gatekeepers, Google and Apple, to verify software that's in their Play stores. The F-Droid store, I think, was closed or bought up by someone who turned it into an ad complex. So really, in my opinion, it's time to start with some novel software. So let's make some software tools that make our existing glass rectangles in our pocket more usable by normal people without having to ask permission first. So we have our glass in our pocket. That doesn't need to change. So we don't need to upend the entire marketplace and break the notion. The AI pin from Humane will never replace a phone. It will augment a phone, perhaps. I can see some early adopters attaching it briefly to somewhere, possibly hanging off their pocket like my BlackBerry used to, not brooch style. But we'll see. We'll see what people end up using it for, the two people that stick with it. We can augment our existing devices and try out some new things. So that's the best way, I think, to start introducing some new ideas. I would not get the version 1 of the AI pin, by the way. Version 1 of anything is usually a little dodgy, but it's still unusual and creative, which is worth looking at. So I'm not dismissing the Humane AI pin. I'm just saying I don't think I would get version 1 if I were inclined. But it will be interesting to see how this device integrates into our day-to-day sort of reflexive use. Not unlike the smartwatch. I will tell you my smartwatch story briefly. I got a what was it? I do not remember. It was some. I do not even remember which one it was. It was a smartwatch I got when I was traveling for Intel, and I wanted it to be able to synchronize with my phone, which would synchronize with GPS, so that I knew what time it was when I landed in different countries, so that I would not have to be worrying. When you are in an airport, you don't necessarily have your phone ready if you're carrying this, and you're checking in, and you're going through some tumult. So to be able to look at your watch and know that the time is correct in the time zone you are in was useful. And some notifications. So I would get notifications on my watch about gate departure changes and late flights and so on. So just that was my main use case. But here's the thing. When you have an Android device and you were using the Watch OS or Wear OS, wherever they were calling it back then, this was many years ago. This was about 7 years ago. You could pair your watch with your phone, and you'd set up your watch, you'd install apps and do all the other silliness that you had to do. And then if you want to repair it or pair it with another phone, so you got a new phone, now you got to pair the new phone, which is thanks to your cloud backups and all that stuff, you can put to the similar state that it was in with the previous phone. So you have the same apps, you're logged in with your same email address, your Google account and all that silliness. Okay, now I want to pair my watch. Well, you got to reset the watch and restart from zero again. So it made managing devices and the user experience a pain. The outcome was useful, but the process was so painful and irritating. I have myself literally eschewed the notion of a smartwatch. I actually have a Polar Vantage M, I think it is. Just a basic, it tells me if I'm moving around sufficiently. I use it at the gym and I keep track of different exercise types and all that. I don't even have email notifications. I have no interface. I have no music controls attached to the watch. I can take the watch off and leave it. I'm not dependent on it. I have not tied it to my phone and vice versa, other than synchronizing the quantified self data. So to me, the smartwatch needed a real overhaul as far as user experience. As watches have had the addition of like eSIMs, so now you can use the watch without the phone paired with it. You can actually use the watch when you're out and about, maybe doing athletic activities that you don't want to have your phone on you. So this sort of thinking where the device is modular and functional as an addition to your personal ecosystem, your personal area network, but is not so draconian in how you are required to pair and reset and start over from nothing. I think that's something to really take a good look at, and we'll see how the AI pin user experience is as an addition to one's personal area network, which is an old term when Bluetooth first came out, but I think it still applies here. There was a moment where Palm was shipping, the Palm brand, new company, was shipping a teeny tiny companion phone, and I know there have been some small devices from Apple even, little tiny devices that are like maybe a half or a third the size of these big giant phones that are available now, the phablets. So you could have an actual little phone in your pocket if you needed it. That was essentially a mirror of your full-size phone, similar to my watch use case. I don't know if those have ever caught on. I think small phones are once again disappearing. It's unfortunate. But the ability to have a collection of devices, if you need them, where you are not completely and wholly dependent on your one monolithic phone with its one SIM, the ability to connect devices and use your main phone as a hub is interesting, but still limiting. If you are a photographer, and you have a real camera, the ability to interact with your phone is useful to upload images. If you don't have a sufficiently intricate card reading and backup scheme, or if you need to send a picture to preview to somebody, there's all kinds of use cases where moving device data around should be completely allowed. They should let you do it. I prefer enabled. You should be enabled to use the devices the way you need to use them. This is where the phone block / Aura project would have been interesting. Or in general, an open platform that really makes use of open standards, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, USB. Those are good starts. There's more. If you can connect your devices the way you need to use them and not be limited, for example, my favorite disappointment is if you have a GitHub client, for example, a Git client on your Android device, you cannot use Git to check things out onto your phone and so on. So you can view things, and through the app or web interface, you can interact, but Git clone, Git pull onto your mobile phone, sorry, nope, not allowed. Why? Because did you know that your phone, with it containing so much of your life on itself, becomes a great source of information if you are passing through the border of one country and into another, or if you have landed at an airport from abroad, you've landed at an airport in the United States, you are not entitled to your protections of your personal data on the outside side of customs and the border patrol, border controls. So this is true if you're walking across a border, flying in through an airport, seafaring, maybe if you land from space, I'm sure. So your device, they can they can plug in to your device and they can grab a whole bunch of data off it. That's already been done. That's a piece of cake. You can try to avoid that, but good luck. So your device becomes a great permanent record for anyone who needs to check up on you. This is also true of law enforcement, criminals. There's a comma in there. So your personal life, your personal dealings, your interactions, people you know, can be revealed and copied and sent to other authorities because the device itself is only encrypted enough to make you feel better. I know Apple has an encryption policy so that they will not divulge encryption keys, or they will not necessarily help to decrypt a device. Even with a court order from law enforcement, I think those will always be tested. But at the end of the day, there's always a company that has come up with a hacking scheme, and they'll just go to this other place, or there's no shortage of ways to get around these encryption schemes because there's only two to worry about: whatever Android is doing and whatever Apple is doing with iOS. So Android deployed on a phone in some other country or in some other marketplace may not even have the same quote-unquote protections that Android in the United States might have, or whatever, right? So there's always a question about what is really on your phone. I have proposed one notion, if you're familiar with containers, the ability to configure a container to run on a device, on a server, on your laptop, on your development machine, on your production machine. Containerization of software has really made a big difference in the world, the technology world specifically, but in deployed applications of those technologies, to be sure. So what if your phone was a container runner, a device with multiple containers? So now I can have my personal data and the apps that manage it. The apps are in a container. The device storage is managed as an attachment to a particular container. And the data on the phone is backed up either in a cloud somewhere or on an external device, a micro SD card or something. And at any moment, I could reset the phone. I could factory reset and have a legitimate data wipe happen, not just flipping a couple of bits and the data's still there. I mean, actually wipe your data. Or what if you just want to have your data external all the time and not store things locally? That should be an option as well. So now you pass through customs, or you have your phone in a location or a circumstance where you don't necessarily want all of your private, personal, secret, sensitive, confidential information sitting in your pocket with questionable security and whatnot. I mean, does Alive and Well really work on those fingerprint sensors? Does Face ID know whether you've been knocked out by a bludgeon? So the ability to dump data off of your phone, but know that it is, securely backed up in a cloud somewhere, or, and I'll get to the or part in a moment, would be super handy for two reasons. One, it would enable you to say, I don't want this data on me at this time. If you want to think about Johnny Mnemonic and dumping some long-term memory, it was a silly movie, but interesting idea. So you should be able to dump data out of your phone, knowing that it was already backed up, and you should be able to restore it later. And the alternative would be to be able to store it locally. So it's basically dump data from one phone to another, or onto an external storage device, or do whatever you want, right? So now you can literally, maybe you get a locker at the airport, and you dump your phone to a micro SD card. You put it in the locker. You cross the border, you go on your trip or whatever, you come back a couple days later in the locker, you have your key, whatever it is, right? There's all kinds of scenarios that can be the stuff of spy movies and so on. But managing and controlling your personal data, where your data is, which device it's running on, I think would be extremely valuable. And it's something that should already be available. It's available on computers in general. If you have virtual machines, you should be able to run at the VM level, container management system, maybe a little Kubernetes on your phone, a little pod of cluster of, or gaggle, whatever you want to call these group of mobile containers that would be able to not only be dumpable, but could be isolated, so that you're not saying, oh, if you install this app, it will watch your keyboard and it will try to capture your password and send it. These are all happening today, and it's going to be even more fun as more and more people are using AI tools and whatever they bring. But the other thing that I think is the real future for these devices. So I've already mentioned the AI pin. I have mentioned the smartwatch situation, integrating the smartwatch, the main phone or mobile device, phone-like. Does anyone use a phone anymore? So the glass rectangle in your pocket, the AI pin or that style of device. Maybe you have an external IR camera. Those are kind of cool. Maybe you are using other devices accessed via Bluetooth or USB or even Wi-Fi. There are a lot of things that can be used modularly as modules around your mobile device. So this is not outlandish to suggest. But what I would say is this: when you walk into your home, if you have a smart home, quote unquote smart home, or wherever you are, my device should be able to integrate in with my other devices, my smart home devices and so on, as a matter of course. It should know, your phone already knows where you are and it's already telling everyone. So if I walk into my apartment and I say, okay, I'm home, my phone should automatically know. It could automatically sync data as a matter of course. It shouldn't be something that I have to fiddle with, although I have, but that's me. But your phone should know it's home. The phone should have, just like the car context that is becoming more prevalent and more buggy, but they'll figure that out in the next 10 years or so. So when you're in your car and your phone can talk, and they get it wrong most of the time, but they do that. When you go into your home, your phone should be able to synchronize data with your cloud or with your home backups or whatever. And you should never have to worry that, I forgot to back up this, or I forgot to save that. At this point, if you are using your phone for real storage, if you are saving pictures that are important, if you have secure documents or contracts and specs, if you have your contact information from years ago with family and friends, you have photos that you want to keep forever, your pet or family members that are no longer here. I only have the picture on my phone. We have the technology to make that no longer a risk. So whether you're crossing a border or whether you just don't want to lose data because your phone gets crushed under a piano or a safe that's comically being moved into a building above you, these are things that are solvable. My mobile device should be able to do what I want it to do, what I need it to do, and I shouldn't have to ask permission. I shouldn't have to worry about which version of what I'm running on it that I have no control over. Monolithic operating system updates are a problem. Anyone who uses Linux knows you can apt-get or yum or whatever, install a package, install a component, install a new kernel. Why are mobile devices not at that point yet? Well, the ones that are trailing edge. They don't have anywhere near the investment and market ability. The Pine phone comes to mind. There are others, the Libra phone. There's one more, which I'm escaping there's a RISC-V option coming out. I know they're shipping a Palm Top device and a tablet and maybe a phone at some point. So these are the future devices. They're all kind of the Maya approach, so they're going to look very familiar, but hopefully there will be some surprises. And again, I would like these platforms to be more open so that people can experiment with things like what happens when I'm home, what happens when I'm out and about. I get to choose which Wi-Fi network I'm going to use. I will give you an example. When I'm home, there's a Cox network, Wi-Fi network available. In general, it's in range. I have my own personal Wi-Fi access that is internal network, right? My phone always attaches itself to the Cox public, like the available network, and it refuses to connect to my personal network at home. So I have to disable the auto connect on the Cox network. But then when I'm out and about, there are Cox access points all over the place, and that just starts sounding weird. So I have to manually account for this and say, oh, now I do want to connect to this Wi-Fi access because I'm a Cox customer. So it's included. It's an option. But in order to take advantage of that, but also use my own network settings at home, I have to go through these shenanigans. I should be able to say when I'm home, This is the network profile. This is, these are the things that my device should do for me. I shouldn't have to fight with it. I shouldn't have to give up. And back in the Palm Pilot days, it recognizes handwriting fine as long as you learn how to write graffiti. So as long as you learn how to communicate with it, it will work just fine. So we live in an age now where technology should be able to adapt to us even more than it already is. The age of AI is upon us. Between now and when it takes over, these tools should be able to figure things out like, oh, you're home and you want to use your home network. Okay, done. That's not something you should have to even complain or deal with. Your data should be backed up. You should know when things are backed up more clearly. You should know which applications I need on my device at any given time. I don't need the car applications when I'm home and vice versa. So my app configuration and storage usage on the device can vary. I don't need to bring every single thing that I use in my car on a plane trip and vice versa. I don't need to, maybe I need Google Translate and WeChat if I'm going to be visiting China. Maybe I don't need those if I'm sitting at home watching TV, right? So I may need to use the device for different things and it can reconfigure itself as needed. So these are the sorts of things that can take place now. And then over time, we'll start to see more novel uses. Head-mounted displays in the form of augmented reality or virtual reality eyewear. Virtual audio, I think, will start to make a real comeback. If you've ever been wearing earbuds that are fairly isolated from outside noise and you hear a noise in your audio, you're walking along, think, oh, what was that? You could have a host of augmented reality features in the audio to help with things like avoiding electric cars, which don't make noise, et cetera, et cetera. So our mobile devices are in need of a refresh. We should have a little bit more, in my opinion, we should have a little bit more control over what they are doing with us, for us. We should absolutely know what they are doing to us in the form of data sharing and policy changes on our carrier and manufacturer and vendor sides. Somewhat famously, I think it's a photographer who stored, no, he was not a photographer, but he stored some very sensitive information in his Google Drive. He had an unlimited plan, and I think he had like 13 terabytes of data. And they said, you're no longer on the unlimited plan. You must get all your data off or it will go away. And the data was very sensitive regarding some court case or something. So it's sort of a nightmare when you don't have control or when control that you thought you have changes. And with more and more reliance on mobile devices, when I was traveling quite a bit, I could live on a phone. I really had no absolute need for a laptop. I became very aware of just how useful a phone can be and how critical a resource it can be if it suddenly breaks and I need to replace it. All the data that was on there, did I have it backed up? What was the configuration? How can I just store my configuration in a place where I have some sort of notion? Sure, Google says, we'll do that for you. And then you can reconfigure your phone when you get a new one, maybe. And that works less and less reliably as each phone iteration takes place. So it's time for a change. It's time for our devices to catch up with our desktop systems, our laptop systems. Even tablets are a little bit more flexible, but not much. But phones and tablets, there's really no reason to make them isolated little islands that we have no control over, that we have no visibility into, other than intellectual property and profitability concerns by our impoopified Apple and Google. So there you go. Let's work on this. I, to be honest, have actually spoken to mobile device people since I've encountered many in my travels. It can be done. There's no reason other than funding the engineering development of such things. But the software systems don't require the hardware engineering. They would require integration. But you can develop these, anybody can develop these things on your computer today and prototype them as normal workflows and applications and infrastructure and so on. So it's just a matter of doing it. And that's where we are. So maybe I should add it to my to-do list, because talking about things is not the way to make them happen. Creating audio program content about them hopefully is somewhere in the middle there. On that note, I will wrap it up. I would like very much to see a change in the future, the near term and medium term future of mobile devices and how they integrate not only together, but with us, our lifestyles, our day to day activities, and each other's mobile devices and so on. So there are enough standards around to interoperate enough to try some ideas out. There's always room for novel approaches to things. The advent of AI will be interesting, but I think the AI pin will be an example of what's not quite right. Reliance on a head-mounted display will be interesting. From what I understand, the Ray-Ban is a Ray-Ban from Meta. Glasses are interesting. They're less obtrusive than the Google Glass. Those were a little obnoxious back in the day. But the more devices and the more technologies that become integrated seamlessly, if you are a fashion tech person, you will see that in the fashion side, they are concerned with look and feel and comfort and durability. And so the technology changes there are more visual and tactile. They're not so much about connectivity or I don't want to diminish. I'm not going to say it's not utility, but a different kind of utility. But the integration of wearable technologies and fashion, making form, fit, function work, and making it a part of our personal area network that can adapt with us, whether we're home, work, school, play, airplane, car, boat, underwater, in the air, wherever we are, in space. All these things are possible. We just have to escape the status quo. I'm looking for more surprise with my familiarity. Don't forget, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, co-fi.com/DanHugo, DANHUGO. Also remember, we're going to get back to the website self-hosting component of the podcast universe, but being visible and available on other platforms like Spotify, and eventually I got to get this one on Amazon Music and so on. All ways to listen to all of my various projects, which are listed on my buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page, and eventually elsewhere. But you can always find me there. You don't have to buy me a coffee, but if you do, I will drink it. Happy New Year.